everybody that's joining us at some other point in some other time. Thanks be to God for technology. This is session 2 for our Great Divorce discussion group. We're going to start with prayer. So would you all pray with me? Gracious and loving God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather through this medium, and grateful for the life of C.S. Lewis and for his writings and for all of the ways that our faith and practice of Christianity is enriched through thinking about writings such as this book. I ask that you would be glorified by our conversation and that our discussion would be edifying to the ways that we live as your disciples in this world. It's through Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I want to start out by saying we read the preface and the first 2 chapters, or at least the first 2 chapters of the book. And what stood out to you? Let's just start with the preface, which isn't really part of the storyline, but it sets us up. What in the preface helped set the stage for you or get your mind turning?
Hold on, let me go get my note page.
Sure.
Well, it made me realize that there's a book I need to read before this one that he is referencing in the first few paragraphs of the preface that I've heard the title but never read. So I feel like if it's just his version of it or somewhat, commentary on a continuation of that story, I need to read somebody else's work first.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell or whatever the actual title is, but that is something I haven't read, and I agree, I probably need to.
Link to a book. I thought
Like Marriage of Heaven.
Anyone else?
Well, he said that he didn't. This didn't necessarily go along with what he believed. I thought that was interesting. And then when I got into the actual chapter 1, I just thought that was just weird as it was. So,
Yeah.
Having read other stuff from C.S. Lewis, which was very logical, very erudite, I guess, intellectual. And then I got into this, and I wondered, what he'd been drinking or something like that.
Yeah.
It was quite different
Yeah.
from anything else I've read.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure we talked about a little bit is that he points out that this is a work of fiction. That he's like, I don't claim to have any knowledge of heaven or hell or what anything is like, but this is a work of fiction, and I wrote it with a moral, and just hold on to it with that reality. This isn't like a scholarly treatise on the afterlife kind of thing.
And if you didn't believe him there, as soon as you read the first paragraph, you would know.
Right. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the preface?
I just sort of thought the same thing after finishing it, that being fairly familiar with mere Christianity and the whole apologetic, logical, step-by-step plan he takes in that, this is going to be very different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Hi, Kathy. Welcome. You're muted still, but everybody's muted when they show up, just in case.
So anyone else in this group ever read any of C.S. Lewis's fiction other than, I don't count Chronicles of Narnia.
The Witch in the Wardrobe.
Yeah. So like he has some other higher reading level fiction, and I'm a big fan, to be honest. C.S. Lewis is probably my all-time favorite author anyway. But the outside of the preface, first few words of the first chapter, it's very much in the vein of his space trilogy, and that he's a whole trilogy of 3 books about a space odyssey, basically a guy who gets taken from Earth and experiencing other worlds through the lens of God's creation. That's not, has nothing to do with our reality. It's just kind of interesting. And this already reminds me of that in that kind of cadence and the way he writes. So if you end up liking this, you might want to check out some of his other fiction if you're a fiction reader.
Yeah. And that's that hideous strength, Paralandra, and there's a third one. I don't remember what the other one is, or the
And
order.
Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth,
Ah,
isn't it? No, is it? I have all three of them. Oh, they're up there.
that's all right. We can figure it out. Also, one of the people we'll meet in this story that heavily influenced Lewis was George MacDonald, and George MacDonald wrote a lot of fiction, like I want to say Victorian era fiction, and a couple of he guys wrote two that were like science fiction-y, kind of like this. One was Lilith, and the other was Phantastes, and they're a little off the wall too. So just throwing that out there.
Well, I just wanted to say for Kathy's benefit, since we spoke just briefly before that we were on the air, he says, I beg readers to remember that this is a fantasy. It has, of course, and as I intended to have a moral.
Mhm.
So you have to think of it that way, Kathy,
Mhm.
when you're listening.
Yeah, this is not like scholarly perspective on heaven and hell. This is a fable or an allegory with an intent to teach us something, and I think it has a lot to teach us, which is why I wanted to do this group. But one of the other things that I think is important, and it's important throughout the story, is he talks a little bit about this either or connection. We can't have now. As good Methodists, we're both and people. We're not really either or people, but he talks about how you can't choose to have a little bit of earth with your heaven or a little bit of hell with your earth. He talks about how the journey toward God is in this, and it's the journey that he talks about is, and I'm just going to read it because I wrote the notes down. This isn't an all-inclusive journey. If we insist on keeping hell or earth, we shall not see heaven. If we accept heaven, we shall not be able to retain even the smallest and most intimate souvenirs of hell. And then my reflections on that was, upon reaching heaven, one will discover that everything that was abandoned along the journey has not been lost. Rather, in completing the journey into God's space, one will look back and see that all is and has always been redeemed, and therefore made good all along the way. And I guess the piece of that is we meet in one of these chapters, I think it's the second chapter, a guy whose plan is to go to the heavenly space and then bring back some real stuff so he can sell it and create community in the gray town. And I think that's sort of the beginning of the conversation, of the beginning of fleshing out what was written in this preface.
Well, I was interested in the line that he said, evil can be undone, but it cannot develop into good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is an issue about theodicy, which is the question of suffering and evil, where there is a Christian tradition where evil is either the deprivation of good or that evil is disguised good. Kind of like, it may feel like evil or suffering now, but God's going to make it good in the end. And that makes it all worthwhile. And what Lewis is saying is that doesn't make any sense.
Not gonna happen.
He's refuting that idea. So let's jump into the first chapter. So we show up in the gray town or the gray city, depending on your perspective. It's always raining. It's always kind of twilight.
Thank you.
I mean, the word I would use for it is kind of dreary, but maybe some people like that always rainy, not quite light, not quite dark reality. What were some of your thoughts as you were introduced to this gray town through the first and second
Where in
chapter?
the world are we?
What's that?
Where in the world are we? What is this supposed to signify?
I would say 17th century or 18th century London, but that'd be me.
Well, I say you just started in, so you read that, you say, this is the opening of the book.
Yeah.
And you're saying, well, first of all, what kind of writing is this? And then you try to figure out what is this, what's the bus mean, and what's behind it, what do they mean, each of the elements.
Dark and dingy.
Dark and dingy, yeah. And what else did you guys think about this town?
Kind of depressing.
Yeah, depressing.
When you think of heaven, you don't, at least I don't really think of gray and overcast, or even hell, I don't think of gray and overcast. I just think of a little more vivid and colorful.
Yeah. Yeah, Lewis paints kind of a depressing picture of this reality, and and we're not yet to the heavenly space yet, so there is that, but it's.
And he doesn't know how did I get here? So it's an interesting start to the story. How did I get here?
Yeah.
That's a little intrigue to pull you along in a story, of course.
Yeah, I think the first words, I found myself. Like he just woke up and he was there.
Yeah.
I seemed to be were the first words. I seemed to be standing in a busy queue by the side of a long, mean street. And I like the description that we get, and I think it's in chapter 2 when he's talking to one of the guys about how, oh sure, there's cinema and there's bookstores and there's all sorts of different things and tobacconists, but none of it's really satisfying is the impression I get from it. And the houses don't keep the rain out and the windows don't keep the mist out.
I got the sense too in some parts of it. I don't remember if it was chapter 1 or not, but the distance was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Things were far away.
Yeah, because he's talking.
Chapter 2.
He's talking to one of the guys, and the guy was telling him about how, oh, we're thousands of miles from where you started, and that's where the bus is, and then it just goes on and on and on, and if you go far enough out, you can see these people who've been here a long time, like Genghis Khan, and Napoleon's the closest one of them all. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was really interesting that at no point in chapter 1 or chapter 2 did he say, I died.
Mm-hmm.
We are walking into the revelation, and it was brought to sharp contrast for me when he's talking to the tussle-haired kid, as they called him, and he's hearing his story, the poet, and he's hearing his story and how the guy just says, well, I threw myself under a train, and then he says he's taken aback by that. Like he's realizing that. I think he's realizing as well, this isn't just some random existence. Something has happened to get him there, and he's unpacking that, and he's sort of on the bus by accident. Yeah. He didn't go there intentionally or willingly. He just looked for people, found people, and got in line. Yeah. Some sense of normalcy for him. So I like that we're discovering the world, and we it took me about 3 pages to go, okay, he's dead. I'm pretty sure he's dead. But he hasn't said it yet. And then he meets the guys on the bus and all I'm enjoying all of that discovery alongside of the main character.
But then the big man hits the short man in the face, and that guy limps away from the queue. Does he just gone away? Why is it mentioned? I mean,
because these are lovely people. These are lovely people.
Yeah, one of the things that I haven't done before, but I'm doing in this time when I'm going through it, is I'm trying to take notes of the different people we see and try and write down their characteristics so I can start to get a guess on them. And I think the guy that got hit and left the line he felt like he was better than everybody in the line. He made some comment about, oh, the sorts of people that are in the line with me, they don't deserve to be here. And that offended the big beefy fellow. And the big beefy fellow seems quick to violence. No, not just on that instant, but
short fuse.
Yeah. Can I share with you what a commentary said about the big man? I don't know. I mean, I did Google discussion on C.S. Lewis's, the big man is a ghost who in life was harsh to his employees and his family, but feels Lynn, who's the narrator, should not be in heaven because of Lynn's actions on earth. So the big man was not of good character in his life, which means, understandable why he punched the other guy in the face.
Yeah, one of the things that we'll see is some of these characters on the bus, we'll see more than once. And their story will, just like Joey, you were saying, their story will unpack as we continue down the road. Not just the main character whose identity we're sort of thrust into, but we get to see more of these characters that we're meeting on the bus. Like the tousle-haired youth shows up again, I'm pretty sure. And the intelligent-looking fellow with the bulbous nose and the bowler hat, I'm pretty sure he shows up again.
So do you have any issue with me having looked up some of these references about who the people are? Because it
No.
did shine a little light on them. And
Yeah, well, and this is our group experience. I'm not here to teach you anything about this book. I'm trying to facilitate a discussion so we can maybe gain some of the moral maybe that C.S. Lewis wanted us to gain out of it.
so the big man's a bully.
Well, there's not one character, so we've been through chapters 1 and 2. There's not one good. There's not one enlightening character in the whole bunch. And when, like I said, when I started into it, wondering what the world this place is all about, first thing they did is everybody tries to cram onto the bus and fussing and fighting and so forth. And then they find out the bus is only half full. That sort of tells you something, right?
Yeah. What were you trying to ask, Susan?
So then I'm new to C.S. Lewis, so
Yeah.
maybe I'm missing something, but are all these people on the bus people in his C.S. Lewis, the author's life? Is that gonna become clearer as we get further along in the story, or am I adding more to it than is there? Or
I would say that there's probably a kernel of truth to that question, in the sense that most authors pull from life experience, and it doesn't take much for me to start to say, oh, I've met that kind of person before. When I'm hearing from these characters, like the tousle-haired youth guy, he's the victim. Like, oh, the schools weren't good enough for me, and oh, the people weren't good enough for me, and oh, my girlfriend wasn't good enough for me, so I just decided I'd show them all and threw myself before a bus. Or a train, I think it was. But I've met that person before, where the world just isn't good enough, and that everyone no one appreciates their intellect or their creativity. I think that's probably more truth than like a particular person in C.S. Lewis's life. Now, he may have had a particular person in mind for some of these characters, but
in a more general sense then, so people who are reading the book can relate to it. Oh, like you're saying, oh, I know someone like that who's kind of a dramatist, or
yeah,
who's quick to judge, or okay.
Yeah.
Or the first. Go ahead, Shirley.
Well, I was just going to say that when I first started reading it, he paints the picture of it being this very gray, as they've said, depressing kind of place, and yet he seems excited when people leave the line and there are fewer people in line. Yeah. So what's going through my mind is, what makes you think that's a good line to be in?
Yeah.
Maybe they're in a hurry to get out of the gray and depressing. Maybe they think the bus is going to somewhere, right?
Right. But, I wasn't at all, I didn't have an idea of where the book was headed. So I'm wanting to tell him, why didn't you find out what kind of line this is before you commit yourself to it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very British of him, at least with my imagination of Britishness, to a line. I'm going to stand in line.
You gotta say Q.
Q, yes.
You gotta say Q, CJ.
I think it was worth noting that C.S. Lewis takes the time to paint this picture of there's shaming, there's violence, there's it's not worth it mentalities, all of these things that we're experiencing through the lens of the main character, who's not been named yet, right? He's not been named yet. But we're seeing it through his eyes, and he's just experiencing it. And he's, what you're saying, he's filtering, oh, I get to move up in line now, because he's still figuring out what is going on. We're seeing all this depravity, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. And then the second person he meets on the bus tells us about this culture of, well, I just don't need you anymore. I'm going to go do my own thing. And if we think backward, we see that 3 or 4 times in the line. The only people that stick it out are the ones that are willing to outlast the others. You get punched, you walk away, or you get an argument with your wife and you walk away. Or you're like, all the things we experienced kind of got unpacked by the intelligent looking man, as he puts it.
Well, we haven't talked about the bus driver yet.
No. You want to talk about the bus driver? We can, though. Go for it.
Yeah, well, I had a totally different impression of the bus driver than Lee did.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I thought the bus driver was the devil because of the way it was described.
Okay.
He was there to deceive people. It was just so fantastical the way he arrived.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, he's going to lead everybody astray, you know, or something like that.
Okay, I got to hear what Lee had to say now.
The bus was jolly. The white raiment that he had, that's almost a universal for good. Not that the devil couldn't do that, of course, but that was what our first part I had. So far, also relative to what Joey was talking about. C.S. Lewis, although he's listened to somebody, he hadn't really interacted, and I presume he's going to be the observer throughout the whole book and the narrator. Yeah, because
Yeah,
he hadn't interacted with anybody really.
We're going to experience this whole book through that character's perspective. The unnamed I is the character we get to see all of this through and experience it through. And I love that way of storytelling because it gives us a first person perspective, but it also gives us a way to discover the unknown. And I think that's a fun way to tell a story.
You're also looking in, looking in on this without being part of it, of course. But that's I don't know what you call it, peaking to a degree.
Yeah, it's yeah. I want to get back to what Joey was saying about how we've seen the ways that people interact with each other and they relate together in this society, if you can call it a society. There's people who are so committed they want to meet Napoleon, so they go and spend 1,000 years or whatever it is to go and observe him, and all they see is him marching up and down, blaming everybody but himself for, I'm assuming, his failure. And then we see the couple that are so enamored of one another that they just decide to just leave the line.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see the first couple we meet, the waspish woman, who's, I'm done. I'm not going to do this. And the husband's like, well, I'm only doing it for you. You know, I've heard that argument. I may have participated in that argument in one way, shape, or form at some point in my life. And it's just, yeah, I know. This is being
Well, the couple, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's just so human. I see broken relationships, and I see the ways that broken relationships and brokenness interact in relationship. I guess that's the best way I can say it. Through the ways people interact with each other in line, in the queue.
Well, it's the kind of the way they judged the bus driver when he drove up, like, well, he thinks he's too good, you know, for himself. And who does he think he is kind of attitude.
Yeah, because he's driving with one hand and kind of swatting away the mist with the other one.
That's why I thought he might not be an angel. I thought he was the devil in disguise.
Yeah.
When you get the idea finally that the bus is leading on to something better, everybody, the ones who leave, they've left something for some reason. And then the couple that left was kind of odd because they just left, to turn around and left because they were so much enamored. But the point was that they left something good to stay back.
I thought
didn't mean anything at the time.
We were talking about everybody jamming to get into the bus. Doesn't that remind you of a concert with no tickets? I mean, with no reservations. Yeah. You know, people trample each other to get in.
Yeah.
But they don't oversell the seats. There will be a seat for everyone.
Yeah.
But we'll push and shove and, you know, and trample each other to get in, to get that seat. And actually, when the last person he had a seat, the narrator had a seat, and it was only half full.
Yeah, it's only half full.
Like I think it's It's the merchant guy, the intelligent looking fellow with the weird nose and the bowler hat, I'm pretty sure, whose whole point of it is to go to the other place, wherever the bus goes, to bring something back, because he wants to create scarcity. And he wants to bring something real back to the land where things aren't quite as real as they could be.
His point there was that if he creates dependency, you have to then be together. And if you have to be together, you'll develop community. That was his kind of thesis behind that, and that's what he was trying to achieve. I thought that was an interesting perspective, like lock them in a room, they'll eventually become friends mentality. And that's not my life experience. I think there's some truth in that sometimes, but I think some people you just can't coexist with. So yeah, it's just interesting. That was his reasoning behind that. Was, if I get a product that they can't provide for themselves, it'll make them stay close to each other. And if they can stay close, they can get along.
Yeah, and if they don't, I love the line, if they don't get along, we can get a police force together and knock some heads. Because that's the way to get people to belong, is to beat them up until they're willing to get along. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but that's definitely been done throughout history. And not too distant history either.
In the future, perhaps.
Yeah, probably.
You surprised me. Has he gotten into, and I forgot where it came into that, when he talked about realness, I thought that was something, where they're going is more real than where we are. Because we haven't talked about the ghostly aspect, filmy, gauze-like aspect of their appearance and being at this point, and what that means. And I thought maybe it's the second chapter it gets into the realness versus what their existence was or their being was.
Yeah. So near the end of the chapter, they're approaching light, and it's sort of an oppressive sort of light where it feels like it hurts. I don't know if that's the right description, but I know there's sort of, I remember it being a painful sort of experience for the eye. And then he looks around and he sees the sort of the impossibilities, like the ghastly appearances of everyone around him. And then it doesn't say what he sees, but it says there's a mirror at one end of the bus, and he looks at his own reflection in the mirror. And I think that's part of that's building into what we're going to be seeing about reality. And the light reveals the truth of a person. And that's why he looks around and he sees these horrible images and this ghostly, not quite real image. None of you would know that, because that starts talking about, I think, in chapter 3. But it's beginning to unpack that, how the gray town isn't real, and it's not, but it's not as real as reality is.
Where they are now is not. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that where they're going is more real than the gray town, more substantial even.
Yeah, that's a good word there, substantial, I think.
What purpose did it serve that the big fight erupted and there were pistols and knives and all of that on the bus? I mean,
well, I think there's probably two. I'm going to say what I think. You all can disagree all you want. I think part of it was narrative, in that he wanted to get the eye talking to somebody else. But I think it's also what Joey was saying earlier. If you get this many people, cram them into a space, a fight's going to erupt, because everybody wants their rights. Like the big beefy guy, I think he says, "I'm a plain man and I just want my rights."
yeah. Well, after the fight broke out, didn't he end up somewhere else?
Yeah, he's a new seat with a new companion.
Oh, right. Okay.
Oh, the intellectual, is that the next one? The intellectual?
Yeah, it's
a long time. Yeah, that's the next one.
It's the merchant guy, and then there's the intellectual that kind of overhears what they're saying, because someone yells at him. It might be the big guy. He yells at him, "Who's all that whispering?" Talking about them, and because that's the other reason the guy wants community and real stuff. He's scared of night. He's afraid they're going to come out, and he doesn't. We don't know who they are because they don't talk about it. He just whispers, and again, it's fear. Fear is motivating him to get people together, to get real things together, to build a real house that'll be safe and where there'll be people.
Well, he says something about it takes scarcity for a society to exist.
Yeah.
Kind of,
Yeah. And he wants the society because he's afraid. That's a key motivator, I think, for a lot of people.
But once again, when the fight breaks out, he all of a sudden he's somewhere else or something, another seat and so forth, and he's not a participant, and that just reinforces what we read earlier. He's a standoff and looking from the outside. So
I like to call characters like that accidental observers.
yeah.
Because everything is just happening to him or around him. He is yet to engage other than be happy to move up in line and hear a couple people's stories. We know nothing about him other than that last line of chapter 2 where he sees himself in the mirror and a little bit of a shock. Like we can tell we're going to explore a little bit of him soon, but yeah, he's an accidental observer.
I call them introverts.
That's not an accident though.
Well, we know somebody we care a lot about, and he likes to collect other people's stories.
Mhm.
He doesn't have stories of his own, but he likes to collect other people's stories.
I won't mind saying it's my son, and he told us a long time ago that he didn't have stories like we. He's younger, but but y'all got plenty of stories. I'll use your stories. Fine. But we moved to the intellectual fellow, and you talked about some people you've known, and anybody who's been to, I didn't say anybody who's been to college or in academia, you're going to see the intellectual fellow, people who just spend their time in ideas and such, and nothing gets done.
Yeah. Well, I love that guy. That he's really the third one that he has a conversation with, I think, on the bus, and he's like, oh, well, that Twilight thing. No, that's not it. It's Dawn. Old people. That's an old scholarly opinion, but the new scholars, the new people this is what they think. And it's, again, you're right, Lee. We've met that person, haven't we? We've met that person who's, I am that person. I'll just be honest. I'm that person. I've read the new scholarly stuff. It's sort of like well, yeah, that used to be true, but it's not really true anymore. That tends to be my sin identity, is I tend to go into that, my shadow side, I guess you could say.
Yeah, we used to know things, didn't we? When I was in college, I used to think I knew stuff. Then I became a junior. But
so, any other thoughts on these characters? Because I want to shift our conversation a little bit
we missed.
when we're done discussing them.
I like Susan's question about, are these people that C.S. Lewis would have known or pulling in inspiration from personal accounts? But I would, as I'm reading through this and listening to the conversation, I'm more looking at them as what I would almost consider archetypes, larger classifications of types of people. We're having like representations of pockets of culture all clashing in one area. So we kind of have the classic bully. We have, like you said, the victim. We have the intellectual. We have the businessman. All of these are overarching characteristics that represent a pocket of people. And I'm curious to see if that continues to play throughout this work or not. So,
yeah, it's the intellectual. I want, in my notes I put down Gnostic, because he wants to overemphasize the spiritual reality over the physical and material. And that's, I think you're right. We've seen some pretty we've seen some archetypes or some stereotypes, and we're going to continue to see those just by the truism that is this story. We'll see characters from that fit different archetypes and different personages that are a broad brush. I wanted to change the conversation a little bit to what do you think, what are you learning so far from this story? Not so much about what's in the story, but about yourself. And that may be a bit of a vulnerable question. So if nobody answers it, I won't be ashamed. But it's
Well, the thing, first of all, the name of the book, and to learn that, which I think we all Christians already know, you're not going to have any, you're not going to have any hell in heaven. That's the first thing I thought about, and I think we're well aware, and I think it's important to us as we live to remember, you must pray to receive forgiveness for the things you know and the things you don't even know about yourself, or your things you try to hide from yourself or from others. And you need to be forgiven of those, because you're not going to take that any of that into heaven. And anyway, the other things I'll comment on later on.
Yeah. Anyone else? What are you seeing? What are you learning about yourself through our reading so far?
Well, I'm learning that I have some definite thoughts that I don't that are not going to change because somebody else says something else. So my first thing I started thinking, what's this all about? Where is he going? Is this hell he's talking about? Etc. I have a whole nother view of that, although the grayness of it and the sort of fugue quality of what he's describing, I agree with that. I think that's the way things are going to be. But it was interesting to me that I could read this from somebody who's writing, who I respect in many ways, but it doesn't change my opinions. But I'm looking forward to see what else we have too.
Well, I've learned that I would ordinarily not read about this fantastical story, because I think I'm just more of a realist. So it's more difficult to read this, but I respect the author and am interested in what it's going to tell me.
Yeah.
And what I'll learn from it.
So you're feeling stretched. Am I
Oh,
hearing?
yeah. Oh, yes. Why would I Google it? After reading 2 chapters, I'm thinking, what did I just read?
Have you ever read any science fiction?
I felt like Colonel Klink. I know nothing, absolutely nothing. You all don't remember Colonel Klink.
Really? Okay.
I will Google that later, though. So don't worry.
It was a good TV show back in the day.
Stalag 13.
Stalag 13, yeah.
Wait a minute. That was
No,
the
that's
movie.
that's a movie. You're thinking it's Hogan's Heroes.
Hogan's Heroes.
That's right.
Thank
The movie,
you,
that's what I was
Jen.
just getting ready to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So you're knowledgeable. Thank you.
I was thinking with the main character getting in line and getting on a bus, I personally would not have gotten in line unless I knew what the line was for.
Yeah.
And then I definitely would not have gotten on the bus unless I knew where it was going. Just one of those, like, is that the right thing to do? It seems dangerous to not know where you're going.
Yeah. So there's an aspect of control in knowledge, and the way this story has begun, we are out of control, completely out of control. We're just following along with this guy who's, I guess, up for adventure. Might be a way to describe it. And Shirley, you said that basically that same thing earlier too. Yeah.
Well, I'm seeing this, and of course, it's T.S. Lewis sort of said this is not true, but I'm seeing this as T.S. Lewis really describing what he thinks if he doesn't believe it. He said this is not what his beliefs are, but I just have taken it right from the first as to the way he sees things will be. I'm interested in seeing what he thinks about what so to speak, what the afterlife will be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and some people do take it that way, even though he expressly says it in the preface that this is a work of fiction. This is not I claim no authority for this, but yeah.
Well, I mean, the fact that it's fantasy
Mhm.
still doesn't take away from the fact that the overall, the ideas, the overall, the moral will eventually come up with, that doesn't, it can still be his ideas. It can still show that his ideas are regardless of the fact that it's fantasy.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'm learning about myself in reading this, I have no idea how many times I've read this story, but I think, and for this time, this reading through, I'm listening to it on Audible. So listening to somebody else read it and doing voices for all the different characters has brought the book to life for me. But I think what I'm learning about myself is that I want things to make sense. I want to try and put people into categories, and like Joey was saying about archetypes, I want to try and figure out their archetypes. Like there's a part of me that's thinking, okay, what's their Myers-Briggs type, or what's their Enneagram number, and that's just in the back of my head, and that's an aspect of control and trying to understand and put people into a box, I guess, and that's always been a part of me. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just my head does that. And I'm learning that even in this story, that there's still a part of me that wants to put people into a box and make them simpler than they really are.
Well, talking about things you've learned, I guess I've learned or recognized perhaps my way of dealing with the work and dealing with other people, which was a psychologist. I think most folks know that, was to be sort of a blank slate and let them react, let them be the one who writes on that, and I take from that and go with the flow, so to speak, as opposed to trying to say something ahead of time or to predict or even, well, predict, I can't help doing that, but without moving things myself. I'm not putting it very well, but the bottom line is to react to what they say and go with that. And I'm willing to suspend judgment, suspend kind of in any predictions or anything. I'm just waiting to see what Lewis has to say, where he goes with it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when I worked for the airline. One of my favorite things to do was to sit in the corner at an airport and just people watch and see how they interact, and to see how they're interacting to him and how they all kind of fit into the big picture and how they behave together. I mean, that kind of thing just fascinates me. I mean, to this day, it still fascinates me just to watch people and how they interact with other people in their environment, and things that are in their control and things that are beyond their control. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm reminded of and kind of relearning about myself.
Yeah. Well, and I think this book is sort of an exercise in people watching. I mean, if you engage it in that regard, I think it'll be helpful for you.
That's funny, Susan. I sit at the airport and watch and imagine a disaster and pick out people that I think how they would react to something, and some that may not be able to at all, that would panic. I do fantasize that way sometimes.
Anyone else? Lessons you've learned so far just in reading this short bit of the book?
There was.
It's definitely, I'm not sure this is a lesson, but it's out of my comfort zone, this kind of book, and him, and I have to remember that he's writing this back in like April of 1945 or somewhere in that general era.
Yeah.
And this is just way out of my comfort zone. So
yeah,
I'm learning that I'm willing to try new things, because I'm stretched, like Dreama said earlier, I'm stretched by it, but I'm not broken. I'm gonna keep reading and keep trying, and
good.
So
Good to hear that. I think this is a valuable book for us. Like I said, otherwise I wouldn't haven't tried to have this group.
Well, I haven't started chapter 3, but at the end of the last whole large paragraph of chapter 2, you really wonder because it's kind of dire,
So,
what is happening.
so for next week, we'll read chapters 3 and 4. And if you're anything like me, it'll be really hard not to keep going. But that's just the nature of this book for me anyway. I have a hard time stopping when there's a story and it's a story that I'm engaged in. I'm one of those people that I will stay up all night reading a book and then realize I've stayed up all night reading a book, and be sorry for it in the morning. But
The kind of author that generally draws you into a story is the more you get into it, the more details and the more you start to kind of understand. I mean, because right now I feel like I'm the perpetual outside observer, and
yeah, and I think that's Joey touched on it a little bit earlier, that I think that we're going to discover all of this along with the character, and there'll still be questions that we have and things that don't get answered because it's a short book. I mean, if this was like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, there'd be a whole lot more exposition, a whole lot more detail, but Lewis is hitting hard and fast with this, and just we're along for the ride.
So are you not allowed to go any past 4?
Oh no, you can read as far as you want to, but we'll only discuss the next 2 chapters next week, because I think there will be enough in there for it to keep us busy for an hour. And if there is,
If you're anything like me, if you read chapters 5 or 6, I'm going to talk about them. So for my sake, I'm not going to read ahead, so I don't spoil anything for someone else.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
and
It's a good idea.
that's
Jen's job is to whack you on the shoulder if you move too far ahead.
Yeah, there you go.
so that therein lies the curse of knowledge. And so it's yeah. Next week we'll be doing chapters 3 and 4, and I've appreciated everybody's contributions tonight to the conversation. I look forward to our next conversation. And would someone like to close us in prayer?
I'll be glad to.
All right, thank you, Lee.
Say what?
I said thank you.
Let's pray. Father, thank you for the opportunity to gather together through the this electronic medium. We're thankful we can get our thoughts together. We can think of deep thoughts. We can think of new thoughts, and hopefully through these means to get a better idea that of you, of the heaven that you've told us about, of what is due what is due to come after life. We live in such a manner that we have faith that we will go beyond this world, and we're so thankful for that. So that's been possible through your Son Jesus, and we are just marveled, overwhelmed at your understanding and your knowledge. We love you in every way. We're thankful for this time together. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
God bless you all. We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Okie dokie.
Thank you.
Bye.